Ryan kind of give some brief introductions. They will welcome all of you as panelists. And then they'll introduce you panelist by panelist to say a few words, share why this issue is important to you, and then they're going to open it up to questions. So if there's anything you're not comfortable with answering, feel free, we can move on, but all of these have been prepared and approved, so it should be okay. We'll all be in the back, so if you need anything, you can just kind of signal us. But otherwise, we'll get started. So thanks so much.
So thanks everybody for being here today. My name is Sean Ryan. I'm a New York State Senator from the Buffalo area. I have my friends with me who you've been speaking to, and colleague Neely Rozic.
Hi everyone, Assemblymember Neely Rozic. I'm from the 25th Assembly District in New York City and chair of the Consumer Protection Committee in the State Assembly.
Senator Griffel was scheduled to join us today, but he had other urgent business, so he couldn't come join us today. But Reed Kinderman from his office is here today, and this certainly is an issue that I have spent many occasions talking to Senator Griffel about, and how important it is. And he invited me to, of course, take a look at the whole state to see how broadband is working. Before we get started, why don't we just go around and just do a quick intros.
I'm Megan Harney. I'm the director of Labo Free Library.
Ryan Boucher, County Manager for Lewis County.
Mike Lefebvre with the Office of the State Controller.
Nick Ho, CWA District 1, Build Broadband Better Team.
Excellent.
And Dave Wolf, I'm the Telecommunications Division Director for the Development Authority of the North Country.
That's fantastic. Thanks everyone for coming out, and thank you to Lewis County for hosting us here today. So Michael, you want to kick off?
Sure. Is it okay if I pull this down because I have to put my glasses on and they will fog? Thank you, Senator Ryan, Assemblymember Rozic, for inviting me to this series of roundtables around broadband to discuss Comptroller Janaboly's report. Our report highlights two similar but different digital divides in New York: availability and access, with each highlighting different problems and requiring different solutions. Broadband availability, just to set the stage, indicates whether a geographic area has the infrastructure to make it wired for broadband services. While broadband access is whether or not a household has a broadband subscription, regardless of whether it's available in their local area or not. Statewide in 2019, just 250,000 people, or 1.3% of the population in New York, did not have broadband available where they lived. Now, this is not a bad statistic. It ranks New York second nationally in the percent of people without service available. And this is thanks in part to investments made by the state and federal government over the past 10 to 15 years to expand service to rural parts of the state. Now, there's one disclaimer when it comes to discussing the availability statistics that I need to mention. The Federal Communication Commission, or FCC, continues to be the best source of data on broadband availability, and they have mapping to track where broadband is available and where it's not. However, over the past few years, the FCC has been under scrutiny for potentially overstating the number of people who have broadband, particularly in rural communities. In a nutshell, if part of a census block has broadband, the FCC considered the entire census block wired for service. What this means is that in rural areas with large census blocks, they could have even more people without broadband than the FCC data indicates. Despite this flaw in the data and the relatively low number of people statewide without service, when you zoom into a specific rural county or region in the state, it can paint a very different picture. For example, while only 1.3% of New Yorkers statewide are without available service, in Lewis County, the number is closer to 15%. One reason for this is that lower demand in less dense rural areas may not generate a sufficient amount of revenue for internet service providers to support the high cost of deploying broadband infrastructure. Over the years, state and federal grant programs have generally focused on projects to expand infrastructure to wire these hard-to-reach rural areas. However, our research shows that over 1 million households, or 14%, did not have access to broadband subscriptions. Many of these households are in parts of the state that are wired for broadband, so it is available, but for some reason they're unwilling or unable to access it. For example, nearly every person living in New York City has broadband available. but 16% of New York City households do not access broadband services. In fact, half of everyone in the state who lacks access to broadband lives in New York City. Now, we don't have clear evidence or data to explain exactly why people aren't accessing internet at home, but we do highlight some compelling data about who these people are. 1 in 3 households without access have incomes less than $20,000 a year. The average monthly price of broadband in New York is about $47 a month, which is the 4th lowest in the nation. However, this expense may be excessive for families struggling to heat their homes or put food on the table. Also, 1/4 of New Yorkers 65 years of age or older do not have access, compared to only 8% of adults under the age of 65. Now, keep in mind that much of the data in our report predates the COVID-19 pandemic, and the pandemic has only accelerated the need for reliable high-speed internet at home for a variety of reasons. By the end of 2020, internet data consumed was up 75% from the start of the pandemic, only 9 months earlier. This isn't surprising considering that during the same period of time, 70% of households with children reported that their kids' classes had shifted online. 41% of working adults had at least one shift at work moved to online at home. I'll close here by saying that our report highlights significant geographic and demographic disparities in who does and doesn't have broadband internet. As we emerge from the complications caused by COVID, we need to refine the data that's available, better understand the challenges, and develop strategies to overcome them. As Comptroller DiNapoli often says, broadband is an imperative for not only our economy, but also for equality of opportunity for all New Yorkers. Thank you.
I have about 100 questions to ask after that, but we're gonna wait.
All right.
So I have to exercise discipline.
No problem.
Yeah, and Nick, we're going to turn to you for sort of an on-the-ground understanding of what's actually happening. We've often heard these statistics cited: 98% of New Yorkers statewide have access to broadband. Can you tell us more from your perspective, from CWA's perspective? Is that accurate? How will that be? How is that impacted on the ground? And make that real for folks tuning in.
Yeah, sure. So that 98% number that Michael mentioned is we don't feel is accurate. As he mentioned, it goes based on census blocks, so a very small bit of that census block is wired for broadband. They consider the entire census block wired for broadband, and it's just that's where the number becomes inflated. So what CWA is for is legislation to on the state level to have a more accurate map, which was passed last year and actually funded through this past budget process. So hopefully, the sooner the Public Service Commission gets started on that, the better we can get more granular data on exactly what the status of broadband coverage throughout the state, and we feel it's a little more accurate to the Comptroller's report than it is the FCC reports showing 98%. And we've seen during the pandemic that a lot of people, I'm from downstate New York, a lot of people, moved into Nassau County, into parts of Long Island to get away from crowds and also to get internet access, reliable internet access through fiber optic service. Because people were learning from home, earning their from home also. So it was just really an essential thing that we learned during the pandemic, the need for broadband access.
Yeah, and the other thing that we've seen during the pandemic is that there are a lot of new funding streams to fund broadband,
Yeah.
whether we're talking the city program in New York City, state programs like Connected, but also the federal government just put out, the American Rescue Plan. Do you have any insight how CWA or how you wish the $65 billion from this week's federal infrastructure program or whenever that package will come down will be spent for broadband?
My understanding is once, the drama kind of, works its way out in Washington, each state starts off with $100 million. And from that point on, they would make each state would make a 5-year plan, and that's where this accurate broadband mapping is really important. Based on that, we can make a 5-year plan and go forward with more of a plan on how to get New Yorkers connected. And, you know, the important part here also is oversight, right? You know, as this money comes down, there's a lot of things that happen, there's a lot of moving parts. The way we can make sure, you know, that the legislation that was, you know, that will hopefully gets passed, that you sponsored, and thank you for that, is provides Public Service Commission oversight of the broadband networks and the service they provide. So once this money is spent, as long as we have oversight on the reliability of that network, that we can get it right, done right the first time, you know, and not just constantly be spending money on, you know, older technologies or Band-Aids on existing services and stuff like that in brand new.
Yeah, and Senator Ryan, do you want to talk about the map?
Sure. I mean, you know, we've been struggling statewide with this idea that, you know, nearly everyone's covered.
Right.
But that never seemed to really comport with my discussions with people in the community.
Right.
So I guess we kind of fell for it for a while, that we had this broad coverage, until we really just discovered it was more about definitions, right? So, you know, we now know that if one building in a census tract has internet and the federal government counts it all, who knows why we'd even use such an inaccurate counting tool. And so Assemblywoman Rozic and I had a bill passed this year that requires that the PSC actually does a map, and it's a comprehensive block by block, house by house map, so we can get a really accurate idea of where the problems are. So, you know, we've been trying to plug holes without really even knowing where the holes were. And I know the libraries have been looking too into, you know, their own mapping to get to try to get a handle on this. And I don't know if you're familiar with that.
A little bit, not tons.
So we're hoping that when our, you know, the PSC gets it going and gets a map out, we can actually use that as a guide. But, you know, the whole time we've been pushing this, there's been pushback from the provider saying, we don't need any more maps. But it's pretty clear, just based on what we're hearing initially, is we need some good maps. So we're happy to push that policy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's incredibly important. It's, you know, this federal infrastructure package doesn't come around all the time. This is like a once in a lifetime thing. It's best that we work hard to get it right, and an accurate map is great, you know, is absolutely essential. Oversight on how the networks are built, and the reliability after they're built, you know, so that they're maintained properly, is also incredibly, you know, an important part of that whole process.
And Ryan, do you want to jump in and just tell us what the situation is like here in Lewis County?
Sure. So we're talking a lot about maps and data collection, and I agree with both these gentlemen. Both the state and the federal level have no idea what they're talking about with broadband coverage. We have taken the initiative here in Lewis County, and we're not alone. Several counties across the state have taken it upon themselves to hire a company to come in and get a full picture of the broadband situation in Lewis County. So let me share the statistics that we receive through our vendor. 49% of respondents said that the only internet access they have is from cellular, hotspots, or satellite. 60% reported difficulty working from home during the pandemic. 75% reported difficulty completing schoolwork during the pandemic. 75% said internet access was very important to staying in touch and informed. And 40% of our residents are paying $75 a month, despite 66% saying that their internet access still was too slow. So we're paying a high amount, not getting good service. On top of that, we have a lot of, I think, the way the state, you know, skews their data is they've provided some satellite coverage, which we all know is not legitimate coverage. So when it comes to, you know, the situation in our community, we've got a very thoughtful board of legislators that work out of this chamber, and they put aside $1 million of our fund balance towards working to solve this problem. And we're putting another $1.5 million of our American Rescue funds towards working, you know, to solve this problem. But the real issue in the North Country and areas that have less dense population is the cost of installation is so high. There's a lot of factors that go into that, but just for example, we're looking at a project right now to cover 96 residents, and the cost is about $6,100 per household. Okay, so that is, exorbitantly high, and not a cost that even, the local taxpayers, we're having that debate, is that worth, our local taxpayer dollars to fund that? I will say, we're a little bit nervous with the PSC, because things are already, the DOT and the DEC already make things hard enough to develop. We can't treat every square inch of real estate in New York State like it's Manhattan, it's not. We don't have the population density, and our real estate isn't valuable in that sense. So people are not going to pay those fees in order to develop up here. So that's something that we need to be cautious about.
I think it's a really good example, like, just hearing the numbers. But this is where I think we all come together around the Internet 360, is that while you clearly have, the availability issue, right? So I live in the city of Buffalo. Only way I can get a broadband is if I get cable.
Right.
So, years ago, Verizon networked huge parts of the state, but they went right by Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, the North Country. So there was a substantial investment made, but they just chose to ignore wide swaths of it. So while I have internet, but it means I have to get cable, pay for that, and then pay for internet. But guess what I get as a result of that? Internet that doesn't work. So our reliability problems sound just like your reliability problems. I can't read the newspaper at home if my kid's doing homework. Someone's got to give. So, I think even if it did come down every block you want it to go down to, don't be so sure it's going to work.
We have a lot of DSL lines, old kind of infrastructure that has not kept up. One frustrating thing is that we've got the state laying broadband on top of broadband in more densely populated areas to make it faster, where we've got parts, of our community that are not served at all. So that's become something that's frustrating for us.
Yeah, and I would just say, I'm sure they're doing that in some parts, but in my part, they're not doing that.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm sure there's some, I just go back to thinking of this as electricity. We all weren't sitting around 75 years ago saying, gee, how do we get electricity to this block? It's too expensive. There was just a set of rules that applied to a utility that told them if they want to provide service, in a region, in a state, they got to provide it on call, whoever wants it. And there's a fee structure that's been worked out before. So the houses, they're going to cost $6,100 each. In our current world, if we had applied those rules, those houses never would have got electricity or telephone. And so I think we're at this problem at the time where, boy, it seems like it should be solved by now, but it's not solved. And I know, Dave, you've been working on this issue, and why don't you tell us your experience?
Sure. So we did the study jointly with Lewis County on the broadband studies, and we did it with Jefferson and St. Lawrence County as well. Very similar numbers across the board that Ryan already mentioned. So we do see this. I think that the things that we see is that costs have gone up a lot, and we're at the point now where, the areas that we work in, they were pretty well covered where you have 20 homes per mile. And the state did a great job of funding and getting the adjacent parts of the network done.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's 10 homes a mile, and now we're down to the 4 and 5 and 6 homes per mile.
Mm-hmm.
But the cost is the same per mile, from the DOT fees, from tax base, from the taxes that are charged on the cable, and the make-ready costs have gone up by over 100% in the last few years. And all of those things combined just make it that much harder to then complete this last bit, and that's where you get that 6,100 per mile. And I will say the only thing I wanted to add to that is on the mapping. I think that's a great idea. We've got very good maps, we feel, of the 3 counties, but they change. So as long as the state gets that map going, but then keeps updating it, because we know in 6 months, or a year, our map is going to be a little dated. Now we'll have somebody go and ride the routes that weren't covered and make sure that they, see what happened. But it'd be nice to have a map that's constantly updated.
Senator, you're talking about the electrification, and one thing that I've personally found a little frustrating and baffling is that the infrastructure that the companies own. So here we've got Frontier and Spectrum. That's proprietary information. They don't have to share where their infrastructure is. Now you talk about planning, and we're trying to spend that $2.5 million. How do we spend that not knowing where broadband is and where it's planned to be? That's been an aspect that's been frustrating, that we've had to do our own legwork to come up with that when it's such an important, public utility right now.
Yeah, and I think we would say the same about after any big occurrence or storm, you have outages all over. You can go to Con Ed, you can go to, National Grid, and they are accountable to the PSC, and they have oversight that they can enforce. That's not the case with internet service or with broadband. And so I think that that's the heart of the legislation that we're trying to do as well. I want to bring Megan into this conversation as well. Can you give us more of your take on what universal broadband access would make possible for the library, for your users, and kind of what you see on the ground with the families that you serve?
Absolutely, and thank you for inviting libraries to be part of the conversation. I think that in the libraries, we're hearing numbers in the libraries. We're seeing some of the stories of how this is playing out. And so when I think about the relationship between broadband access, libraries and our communities, it's complex because we are in the business of creating access to information, and we offer access to the internet, but how we can do that is limited in some ways. We can overcome some barriers, but there are still other barriers there. And what we've seen, especially during COVID-19, is that the issue of access had been building for years. The pandemic accelerated how those changes were impacting our patrons and community members. And we're seeing how it's playing out in everyone's daily lives. I see patrons and community members grappling with how to do important and everyday tasks. So telehealth and banking, job applications, job training, dealing with unemployment and retirement, schooling and testing. And so many of those are virtual only now, right now, but at least some of that will stay this way. And so it will continue to be an access issue. It increases access in some ways because you don't have to travel, but the problem is to have access, you have to have the internet connection and a device and knowledge of how to use it. And so in libraries, we are working to provide those things, devices if people don't have them, internet access, and also tech help because people come in and ask how to do the things that they need to do. So we see patrons doing this. We, outside of library hours, we see people in the parking lot using our Wi-Fi because our services are there, but they're limited by transportation, how people can get to us, and then the hours that the library is open. And we are doing everything that we can to overcome those barriers. So changing our Wi-Fi rules, taking a password off, having it available 24/7, having it available in outdoor spaces. But that is kind of the limit of what we can do. And when you're looking at all of the things that people are having to deal with, all of the things that people have to do in a virtual format, that there are limits to that.
And I'll harken back to the commonalities of our problems. So, I passed your library this morning. It's in a town surrounded by a rural area. I live in a pretty dense city area, and at 5 o'clock when I go by my libraries, the parking lots are full. There's kids sitting on the front stoop. They walk up to download their homework, If I go out into the suburban areas, I see the exact same thing, is that people are using their libraries, their fire halls, their municipal buildings as places to get. These are areas that actually have availability, but for some reason, it's not working for them. And I think that's a mix of price that, Michael touched on, but also the quality. Is that, I think a lot of my constituents are paying their monthly fee for something that's very unreliable. And when it comes time to download your homework, you just can't sit forever and wait. So instead, you'll leg up to the local library or have mom or dad give you a ride somewhere. So this is for people who have quote availability and are paying $700 a year, and they're not getting something that works. So I think these sort of three issues: the availability, the access, but the quality is really still what we're fighting. So I know while you're fighting to get it down certain roads, I'm fighting to make sure it works for the community who's already paying it. And if it doesn't work, you're on your own. You gotta go sue Spectrum because you lost 2 days of service. But I know if my national grid went up for 2 days, I wouldn't have to go fight National Grid. There's a set of standards. They would get fined for every day they don't have service. Somebody would help me through that process, and that's sort of where I'm getting. The longer we go on with this issue, the more I'm getting toward the end of this saying, okay, we're going to get it down your roads, and then we're going to be back here in a year, and your folks are going to say, well, thanks for getting it down my road. Stuff doesn't work, and it's expensive. So, Michael, in your reports, did your office look at reliability or quality at all, or did you just stick to the access and availability?
We did stick to the access, but I can speak a little bit to another FCCism that I think has led to that, and that is an old standard that they still adhere to. So 25 download, 3 upload megabits per second has been around for a very long time as the benchmark standard. And because that is the predominant data set, that is what we used in this report. We disclaim it, we talk about it, we talk about how it is not sufficient. So when you talk about, I have broadband, but it's not enough for my household, well, that's because 25 megabits of download speed is not sufficient for 3 people in a household, a child, a parent reading the newspaper, a child trying to download their homework, and maybe the television's on and it's over, and you're utilizing that for your internet. You're tapped out, and you don't have any more broadband essentially that you can push that through. So that's I think speaks volumes to the reliability issue. So part of what the FCC on the mapping side, that's one thing. Yeah, and I agree. I actually think it is the most important aspect that we start with. You need to know where the problems are, but you also need to get with the times, particularly in a post-COVID environment where you've got multiple people. I mean, in my household alone, my phone, my TV, and I probably have 15 devices that are all tied to the internet in some capacity. I have 2 daughters that were both in school at the same time while I was working from home. It's just, you've got 100 megabits per second. That seems to be the new standard that I think a lot of people are looking at, and getting reliable information just on that has been a challenge. And it's far less than 98% if you want to talk about, who has 100 megabits per second available to them. And then the cost even goes up from there at that point. So
That's interesting that it's also the reliability of what you're buying. So when I called and said, it really doesn't work, they said I could upgrade.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt like when you go to a sporting event and they say which side is louder, and someone's twisting a little dial, I don't really know if I'm getting anything more by paying that additional money, or really somebody's making a switch go on that I get enhanced service now for an extra $18 a month. So is anyone really measuring what's coming through the people's houses?
a lot of this, and I'm just gonna, one thing that I had heard, it is a public, you refer to it as a public good. And I think that is the sea change in the way we think of, in the way broadband needs to be thought of. When you think of it as a public good, then that's when the PSC comes in, you start regulating, the issues that you talked about start coming into play to make sure that what you say is getting put into households are there. You're holding, internet service providers accountable, and you're measuring, because that's part of what you do when you have a public good. But right now, it's still private. We view it that way, and I think I would argue at this point, particularly in post-COVID, it is more of a public good now than it ever has been. But it is still viewed as a private good, and a lot of information is protected about what goes. I don't even think you can get an accurate picture about what a company that actually has infrastructure in place, what they're capable of putting out to the homes in that area. They will tell you what people are accessing, but they won't tell you what they have laid in the ground and what the max capacity is for that area. That's private. So until you get to an environment where you view this as a public good, you're not going to get, I think, a lot of the information that you'll need to make those sort of assessments.
So perhaps if the company just keeps getting customers, they just keep tapping into the same infrastructure, then everyone
Fitting
just gets a little
everybody else
less.
Exactly. That's why when you get home from work sometimes at 5 or 6 o'clock, that's when you find your biggest problem, because everybody's getting on the internet at the same time when they get home from work. It just thins out, you have more people accessing the same pipes at the same time. So,
Absolutely. What he's describing is something called shared bandwidth. So like a cable modem or, something like that would dedicate some bandwidth, and it's proprietary, so we don't know how much, but to a neighborhood. So everybody in that neighborhood is using it at the same time, and you do a speed test, it'll be very low. We had a story that we heard from one of our technicians who was actually finally, when fiber optic service became available, switching them over. He was working from home, this customer was working from home, and as soon as he heard the school bus pull up in front of his house and the doors open, he knew he had 5 good minutes to finish what he was doing, because he was done for the day after that. Because of the shared bandwidth, all the kids would come home and do homework and whatever else they're doing, on the internet nowadays. But that's, that will, so that'll be the problem in trying to gauge how much speed you can get, because if you do a speed test from a person's house, it depends on the time of day, it depends on how many people are using it, and, that type of thing. So that's why, we encourage like dedicated bandwidth, which would be like a fiber optic right to your home type of situation. The only thing that would slow down a connection if a fiber optic line was run directly to a home or business is the people in that house, right? Not the neighborhood. So you're getting what you're paying for in a situation like that.
Is there a consumer product available now? Is that Fios?
Yes, that'd be Fios, that's fiber optic, direct fiber optic to the premises. Yes, absolutely. So Fios is one of those services. There are other companies that are running, their version of that. Yet to be seen if it's that good, but the companies that are offering that Fios product, that is a dedicated bandwidth to your home. We feel the most reliable, maybe not the most convenient, you know what I mean? Because once you leave your house, you don't have that connection, but definitely the most reliable, something you can lean on.
And then what am I getting if I'm getting mine from a cable company?
You're getting that shared bandwidth. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, if you can't get to sleep and you get on the internet and it seems like it's going great, it's probably because you're the only one on that network at that time. But
But if
3
you're
o'clock
at-
in the afternoon,
If you're at Megan's library,
right, exactly, when the kids come, there you go. Then everything would be going a lot slower because everybody's using all the internet all at once. Same thing with cell sites also, a cell tower, a cell antenna has that shared bandwidth, so more people are using it, So I don't think a cell service will ever be a good replacement for fiber optic right to the home. But that's the cell service. Now, just one other quick thing too, the federal infrastructure bill has a lot of money for broadband build out, but it also has money assigned to it for affordability. So issues like $6,100, per customer coming down the block can be addressed and make it a little bit more affordable for those customers, so they don't have to pay that, bill to try to get that return on investment for the company or something like that.
So knowing this, how the heck are you trying to negotiate with companies to come down a road? I mean, it seems like it's a difficult place to be.
Yeah, well, it is, and I agree with Nick that I think fiber to the premise is the best solution. But there are other ones that work okay for now. The other thing that's good about fiber is it's the easiest to upgrade. So you upgrade the core equipment and you've upgraded everybody on the network, as opposed to if you have to go home to home to home to upgrade the outside plant infrastructure. So, yeah, it's very hard to get companies to do that. And in some cases, we allow them to access our fiber if we're in that area and serve those individual customers because it's the right thing to do. But it's hard to get somebody to build down there new without a grant program, this federal grant program. They're not going to do it. You might be able to encourage a wireless internet provider to at least get some service there. But I don't think anybody would build down the roads there for $6,100 a mile or $6,100 per customer, unless it's, even at $70 a month, that's a long return on your investment.
How do we get telephones down on everyone's road?
I was looking up the Rural Electrification Act of 1936, trying to kind of familiarize myself with that, and it was actually federal loans that kind of paved the way at that time. But to build off what Dave said, it's already hard enough for us to attract providers. I get a little nervous about another state agency we have to comply with. Frankly, right now the DOT, a state agency, is one of the biggest blockers of broadband expansion in rural areas. Beyond that, a third of our counties in the Adirondack Park. Impossible to expand any type of infrastructure in the Adirondack Park. We wanted to do wireless infrastructure in the Adirondack Park. We had to put up something like 60 towers because they couldn't be taller than, the highest pine tree or something. So another state agency that is seeing things through Long Island, Westchester, Manhattan point of view, I don't know if that's good for us. And so my question for you guys would be, how can you make sure that Northern New York isn't going to get lumped up in the same bucket as the real estate that's worth millions of dollars per square foot down in the city, when up here, we've got farms and 10 houses on a road? How is that balance going to be ensured?
I would just say, I'm not from the area where there's $1 million of real estate, and, we somehow manage electricity to all our houses and, telephone. So, I look at how we regulated utilities in New York State as something that works. I never get a consumer or a constituent calling me saying that their electricity is intermittent. And so, but that's, I think, because of the PSC. I'm not an expert in rural electrification, but I'm pretty sure that both, National Grid and Verizon are only going down certain streets because there's a set of rules requiring them to. I do get a whole lot of calls about cable, which is also very, very, very loosely regulated. So, so I guess I hear you, but I also, I'm pretty confident that if we put a set of rules together that says you have to provide consistent services and you have to, submit speed tests to show that what you're selling to the consumer is actually what they're paying for. I just view those as consumer protections. So even if, in fact, you're able to get someone to come down, the $6,100 road you were talking about, you're just back into my problem now. It's either not working, it's too expensive, it stopped working. And when I interact with companies after that, their attitude is, who cares? We'll take care of it when we get to it. So I understand we don't want to put up needless hurdles, but we've had, very little hurdles, and my community is underserved.
And the other perspective on all of this, which I think Nick or Mike touched upon, is there are lots of different programs, broadband programs out there to incentivize companies to make it more affordable or make it more accessible. They either opt out or they sue us in courts so that they don't actually have to implement those programs. So for me, it's, while that's tied up in courts and making its way through, like, it's incumbent on us as legislators in the meantime to set up a system that works for all consumers and to make it universal and to make it as equitable as possible. Because even when left up to the best intentions, that, that we're not being met halfway. So
Yeah, I mean, just going back to sort of my lessons in copper, which were, back when telephones were starting to become ubiquitous, everybody wanted to provide them in Buffalo, but nobody wanted to provide them in the rural areas outside of Buffalo. So the deal became, you can't provide in this area unless you agree to this whole area. And, that's my sort of understanding of how, in fact, we did get in place things like electricity and telephones to everyone.
So the PSC will be able to tell Frontier, Verizon, Spectrum, hey, if we're gonna give you access to this part of the state, you're also gonna have to serve these parts of the state.
With broadband, because they do have, that's still a requirement. All of the incumbent local exchange carriers are required in the service area that they have to at least provide service to you.
That's right.
But not broadband service to you. So-
Right.
So Fios is available we just got Fios in the North Country, in one small area for the first time, just last year, and it was because the state gave a grant for them to build it out. But it doesn't cover 99% of the North Country doesn't have Fios. It has a lot of Verizon, but not a lot of Fios. And that's the issue, I think, is what's in 1984 when they decided to break up the phone companies, which they didn't do with the electric company. That the phone companies started to say, well, I'm not going to then spend money where I don't need to, and other than they have to give basic service, but they don't have to give fiber service. So I think, in answer to your question, it's just now a matter of more economics. You would think it'd be a lot cheaper to just build over that copper.
I mean, if you think it doesn't make sense where you live, think about the city of Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Albany. I mean, you have somebody who can get Fios. You can't get them in any of those cities unless you live right on the border and they did the other side of the street, then you might be able to get your side of the street done. But, the whole swath of the state's economy was, told to keep trying to get internet over your copper line.
One of the interesting things I was just going to add out of that study that would maybe help on the affordability part, we got a lot of comments, way more than is typical. So it is a subject that is very passionate with people in the North Country and are very passionate about it. But most of the comments were centered around not just affordability and availability, but also competition. A lot of people, to your what you're trying to address. I'm so frustrated with my current provider. I need somebody else because I have to just pay what they say and there's no choice. And that's what we see up here is there are people who are served, at least have service, but they don't have second choice. So they're stuck with what they have.
And going back to the commonality, like that's my house.
Yeah, right.
So, but my cousin who lives outside the city, he's got a choice of Fios, of cable. He's got like 3 choices, and I pretty much have one choice. I guess I do have a second choice. I could get it through my copper line, and that's how we did it for a long, long time. And until my daughter has finally reached about 8th grade, and they said, "Dad, we really don't have internet. You're pretending we do, but it doesn't work." So then, you had to go to the cable, but there is no second choice. And I don't think, and you might know this, Nick, better, they don't have to go through a rate approval process if they want to jack up.
Not for broadband service, they used to for good old fashioned phone service, back in the day. But to the point that it was argued that wasn't needed anymore for broadband and that the marketplace would work that out. Competition would work that out, but instead of seeing competition directly throughout the state, we're seeing kind of virtual monopolies in parts of the state where one company only, offers in this area, and in the next area, one other company will offer service and stuff like that. So we're not seeing the expansion of, companies competing with each other. And as a result, the price is going down through competition and reliability going up.
So instead they're divvying up territories.
Pretty much, yeah, exactly.
I believe that there's actually even isn't there a law, federal law that actually prevents price setting around internet service?
There is.
That was the $15 subsidy that was passed. That's what bound it up in court, was around that, the premise that the state couldn't regulate the price of internet. So nothing else has that in that space because, again, the public good versus a private good. So,
Well, it's been very informative to me. I mean, really part of the reason we're here is we want to hear different, I guess I would say different sides of the problem. And to see if maybe there isn't a problem, but it's pretty clear that there's some problems here. Certainly everything I learned here today, we're going to take back to Albany and figure out how to come up with a public policy that could make everyone's life a little bit easier. Make it so libraries don't become the place where everyone goes to get internet, and hopefully free your 2 times to do other things to help develop your communities. But it's been very informative.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it takes a pandemic for us to reassess things like broadband and access and affordability and availability. So I think all New Yorkers, regardless of geography, realize that they need internet access for telehealth, for schooling, for libraries, for working, for accessing unemployment in times of need. So that really brings us together. Hopefully we can pass this legislation with keeping in mind all parts of the state and with your support as well. And thanks, Senator Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, Assemblywoman Rozic. Thanks everyone for gathering today, and thank you everyone who came out to listen about this important subject. Thank you.
That's a wrap.
I did bring copies of the controller's report. They're all